Steve Coogan told us that there would be private prosecutions if the police don't act. He says it's going to happen. Do you believe that?
It may well happen, but those are criminal prosecutions.
The sense we got was that Harry was slightly disappointed. He wanted his day in court.
He wanted to achieve an acceptance by the newspapers that they had carried out these activities.
He wants there to be a full inquiry or police
Yes, I
inquiry.
think he wants a proper investigation by the police. You know, he is one of a large number of victims who want to see something more.
Would you work for Trump again?
That's a difficult question.
Before you watch today's episode, we want to remind you that tickets are on sale for the newsagent's live shows with HSBC UK. We're kicking off our tour at Birmingham Symphony Hall on February the 17th. Then we're off to the Bridgewater Hall in Manchester, that's on February the 24th. And finally to Usher Hall in Edinburgh on March the 11th. Head over to Global Player to get your tickets for any of those dates. The link will be in the description below. We're really excited to see you there. Well, joining us now is David Sherborne. David, a lot of people will recognise you from those moments outside High Court. They will know you as Prince Harry's lawyer, Max Mosley's lawyer, Princess Diana's lawyer, Johnny Depp's lawyer, Colleen Rooney's lawyer, the list goes on. Whenever a celebrity is in trouble, you sort of pop up. But explain to those who don't know what it is you actually do.
I mean, I'm a media, a privacy and entertainment barrister. And I've been that list makes me feel very old indeed. And so I represent clients. Obviously, some of the clients that I represent or have represented are high profile. So, you know, they will make a splash. You'll see it on TV. You'll see it in the newspapers. But there are a lot of clients that I also represent that hopefully, if I do my job right, you will never know about. So that's the other side of it. But yes, obviously, the cases I'm most known for are the ones that are the highest profile.
Well, let's go back just a month then. Prince Harry, your client, hit the headlines when Murdoch's news group newspapers offered him a full and unequivocal apology for serious intrusion into his private life from 1996 to 2011. Were you surprised?
I think it was a long time in coming, and really the newspaper group had a very stark choice. Either they made the admission or we'd have ended up having a very public trial, and whatever the result for Harry's claim personally would have been, because they had a defence very much based on he should have known a long time ago. Whatever would have been the result of that, a lot of evidence would have come out, and a lot of evidence has already come out in the public domain, demonstrating that these sort of practices, unlawful information gathering through phone hacking, through use of private investigation and so on, that was widespread and habitual, used both in News of the World and The Sun, and that would have come out at trial, and that would have been the result come what may. Whatever Harry's individual claim, however that would have ended up, there would have been that finding. So they had a choice, and they chose in the end to make the admission, but it was a long time in coming, and there are a lot of clients I've represented over the years, probably about 400 or 500 individual clients, who were very, very happy to see finally an acknowledgement that the Sun newspaper had also been guilty of doing exactly the same as the News of the World had done.
I mean, it came right at the 11th hour. We read it was...
I think beyond the 11th hour,
wasn't
it? Yes.
So just take us into that moment. You're standing presumably with your clients, and you get the... I mean, what is it? Is it an email? Is it a text? Does somebody come up and say we're ready to settle? I mean,
very similar to the last possibility. I mean, what happened was, without going into too much detail, because obviously I can't, but I think what was clear to people in court was, as I stood up, I think it was the Tuesday morning, I had my notes in front of me to spend the next 3 days opening the case, explaining all the documents we had, the evidence that was going to be called, and so on. And I think it was really about 5 minutes beforehand that I was finally tapped on the shoulder and told that parties were very, very close indeed. And could I ask for more time? Look, it's not unprecedented, but in a case of that, with that profile, it was quite unusual to sort of get the tap on the shoulder and then have to ask the court for more time. And
were you a bit disappointed?
Well, part of me was disappointed, yes. I mean, professionally, you want to get the best result for your client, and that was the best result in all sorts of ways. Did I have a slight, I think regret puts it too high, but did I feel that I, missed an opportunity personally to have a 8-week trial with all the kind of press and reporting and the impact that has, most importantly, not necessarily for me personally, but the impact it has for hacking and for that litigation which had gone on for 15 years. Yes, I was slightly disappointed not to be able to do that, but ultimately my job is to represent clients, and for the clients that was the best result.
The sense we got was that Harry was slightly disappointed. He wanted his day in court.
I think Harry wanted his day in court in one sense. I mean, it's very clear, whatever you may think of Harry, and obviously I have my own personal views. I've known him for a number of years, particularly professionally known him for a number of years. Whatever one may think, he is absolutely clear and focused on what he wants to achieve and passionate about doing so. And I admire that. I admire that in any client.
And what was it?
It was he wanted to achieve an acceptance by the newspapers that they had carried out these activities. And the reason why I say that, what he wanted to achieve, is he didn't want to achieve it for himself. He wasn't interested in the financial compensation that would come with it. He wasn't interested in personally having his day in court. But what he wanted to do is, and he believes this, absolutely genuinely, that that's his role, that is his public duty, is to represent people who don't have the voice that he has, like him or not. That's true. And that's what he wanted to achieve. That was his sort of primary objective, and he did achieve it.
Does he feel that now?
Well, I can't comment for Harry. And I'm sure he can comment himself about it. I think there is an element, obviously, of wanting individuals to be held to account, but that's less important than the company being held to account, because individuals change. What he was really concerned about is the culture, and the problem is that the culture was continuing. It obviously, a lot of people say this is all historic. It goes back to the sort of days of the early 2000s and even before then. But the truth is, where, for example, with the Sun newspaper, you have the same people in charge, there's a real concern as to, what is the corporate governance, what is going on at a much greater level than just, which particular individual was responsible.
Did you think you could get actual prosecutions from this? Did you think you would get what you got, which is the full and unequivocal apology? Like, when you're setting out to him, the sky's the limit, or are you trying to...
No, I mean, I can only tell him what I know from having, as I say, led the process for so many years. What happens after a civil trial is really up to, much as clients, want some greater accountability, that's entirely a matter for the police and for the CPS. And so, no, I don't make any promises about what happens beyond my role. But in terms of my role, yes, I think bringing to the, into the public eye exactly what went on and, the impact it had on everyone. And as I say, I represented, I think, taking all of the newspapers into account, probably 800 or 900 different people, and the impact on all of them, obviously their varying degrees, is enormous. And that's one thing I learned through the early years of being involved in hacking, is quite how damaging the effects of it were.
Yeah, I mean, you, after the judgment, the ruling, you accused NGN, the newspaper group, of obstructing justice, of deleting 30 million emails of potential evidence, of repeatedly lying under oath to cover their tracks. Now, they have said, with this full and unequivocal apology, they believe this draws a line under the past. You don't.
Well, it's not for me to take it beyond the line. I took it to the line that we, as civil lawyers, not criminal lawyers, as far as we can go, it's then for the authorities or for Parliament to look into whether to take it further.
And do you think they should? I mean, do you know of any police investigation now that's going on?
I don't know of any police investigation. I'd like there to be an investigation, if nothing else, than to say, well, we've looked at it and we've made a decision as to whether or not we can take it further.
So I think the Met Commissioner, Mark Rowley, said there has to be something radically new for them to do that.
I don't know what would constitute radically new in their eyes, because the police investigation, the criminal charges have always been far behind the civil process. The civil litigation has really managed to uncover all sorts of evidence that the police never had at the time that the original trial took place. So I don't know what they would regard as radically new, but to my mind, there is a lot of evidence that hasn't properly been investigated now.
What would you say to people who say, "Oh my God, this is done now. This is all in the past. This is a change in how the media works and how the papers do things"?
I think, look, obviously the activities that we focused on were very much of their time, in the sense that I suspect phone hacking doesn't take place anymore. It's outdated as a mode of communication, because most people don't leave voicemails. But we know that activities still go on. The extent to which newspapers are involved in them is something which I can't comment on. But the fact that activities still go on, people want to get information about other people, and there are ways to do it. There are lawful ways to do it, and there are unlawful ways, and often unlawful ways are cheaper and quicker. And that's what happened back in the day, and I'm sure it happens now. But the same people in some of the newspapers are still in charge, and therefore there's an understandable concern amongst victims that what's to stop the same people using the same techniques as a shortcut to getting information?
I mean, Steve Coogan told us, sitting where you are now, that there would be private prosecutions if the police don't act. He says it's going to happen. Do you believe that?
It may well happen, but those are criminal prosecutions, and there are all sorts of tests and safeguards to prevent anyone bringing a criminal prosecution in a private capacity. That's, as I say, that's not a matter for me.
So it sounds as if you've slightly not washed your hands, but you've said, "This is my job. I can't make other people do their job." I mean, is that how you feel now?
Well, it isn't how I feel. I mean, I led the sort of Mirror Group litigation. We got to a trial. We got findings about corporate knowledge of unlawful behaviour. We have been bringing news group litigation for 15 years. We finally got the admission and the acceptance that the response to what happened with the arrest in 2006-07 was regrettable. There is litigation relating to Associated Newspapers. There's a trial starting. That's the Mail. Sorry, that's the Mail. Starts in January of next year. So that's the sort of next piece of the jigsaw.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Gordon Brown, I think, was one of those who's been pushing for Will Lewis. Will Lewis now runs the Washington Post, to be investigated for this email obstruction, what he's calling deliberate obstruction of email deletion. I mean, are you sort of joining the dots at this point with Gordon Brown, or do you sort of say, yeah, over to you now, this is for the...
Well, I'm instructed to bring claims by people who instruct me. Yeah. It's not a roving brief that I have. So if a client comes to me and says, I've got a complaint, I've got a potential claim, they actually have to go to a solicitor first, as you know, in this country, and then a solicitor comes to me, then I consider it. But it's not a campaign for me. That was the work that I've done, and I found myself leading 3 giant pieces of litigation. And I have a lot of, I have very much been sort of aligned with the claims people have brought, because I understand, and I've seen the impact, as I said, over the years. Yeah. So, I've really been fascinated by the process. But as I say, beyond that, it's not my role. I'm not campaigning.
Let's go back a bit into the past, and some of the other sort of earlier cases. I think it was 2008 that Max Mosley was accused by the News of the World in a headline that read, "F1 boss in sick Nazi orgy with 5 hookers." Max Mosley was the son, obviously, of the black shirt Oswald Mosley. I'm trying to piece together what happened then. So he comes to you and says, "I had the sex orgy, but I'm not a Nazi"? Or did you say, we can win this? Or, I mean, what was
Actually,
that?
that's really interesting because as you were saying that, I was remembering how it did happen. Quite often it happens in a very sort of mundane way because, as I say, clients go to solicitors, generally speaking. You do get some clients after a while who will call you and then you put them in touch with a solicitor. But this one was very different. I remember being at home on a Sunday morning and actually reading the newspaper. And about half an hour later, I had a call from Max Mosley's lawyer to say, "Are you free? Don't know whether you've read the front page of the News of the World." And when I said yes, that was the sort of start of it. That's an interesting one because I remember the first meeting I had with him, and I think this has, again, been the public domain. Obviously, I have to be careful. I'm a privacy lawyer. The last thing I can do is start giving away confidential information, although, unfortunately, Max Mosley is no longer with us. And he came to see me and he said, "What do you think my chances are?" And for good or ill, I have a little bit of a reputation for giving people fairly straight advice. I'm not a fan of saying 50-50. I'm not saying there aren't cases where it's 50-50, but really anyone can say 50-50. And I remember him reminding me years later that I had told him he had a 100% chance of succeeding. And the reason I said that is because it was patently private. What he was doing in the privacy of his own home or privacy of an apartment with other consenting adults was entirely a matter for him, and there was no public interest in it. And that's ultimately what the court found. So the headline is very lurid and, it makes for good newspaper reading, but underneath it was a gross intrusion into somebody's private life.
Were you one of the lawyers that called it a standard S&M prison scenario?
I'm not sure I can claim authorship of that phrase. I probably did say that at one stage, and obviously, that's one of the interesting things about the job is that you find out you get involved in cases which have all sorts of facts which you know nothing about before you do, and then you learn, you become an expert, and most of the time you have to forget it because you have to go on and then become an expert in another sort of area. Obviously, as part of the case, not only did I have to speak to Max and understand what this aspect of his private life involved and why he did it, and the same with the consenting adults who were also present. There was no suggestion any of them weren't consenting, and all of them, when they were sort of cross-examined at trial, said they didn't think of it as anything to do with Nazis at all. It was just, I think one of them said at trial, there are only so many scenarios you can act out in a sort of S&M situation. That phrase sounds familiar. I'm not sure it was my phrase, but
so you won the case.
Absolutely, yes.
And the case then made the paper presumably pay up. And
yes.
I guess what I would ask is whether it ends up being a slightly Pyrrhic victory. If you feel that he's just had his sex life dragged through the courts and the papers again, and the News of the World, probably enjoys the publicity.
Yep.
Do you ever sort of stop and think, legally, maybe, yes, but it hasn't shut down any of the kind of darkness around having that privacy invaded? If anything, it's augmented it.
Well, it's a really tough question for a client. And the problem with that case was that the News of the World didn't come to him first. They deliberately chose not to. And they chose not to because, as the editor at the time gave evidence in court, they knew he would try and stop them. So that became a whole other chapter of the case. We went to Europe to try and get some finding that there was an obligation on newspapers where you're talking about people's personal privacy to at least give an opportunity to stop it, because it's obvious once something's out, once the genie's out of the bottle, the damage is done. So Max had a very difficult choice. What do I do? Do I just let this go? Because from a personal point of view, the less said about it, the better. Or do I do something about this in the hope that it might stop newspapers doing the same again to other people? And that's exactly why he did it. And he was right, because he won. Ultimately, the court said there was nothing Nazi about it. There was no public interest at all, and they should never have published a story about it. So I understand what you mean by a Pyrrhic victory. In personal terms, yes, it just gave more publicity. And it has an awful postscript, as you probably remember. His son committed suicide because he was unable to deal with the consequences of the story.
I mean, I guess it raises questions. If I bring you on to the Johnny Depp case, when he tried to sue the son for suggesting that he beat his wife Amber Heard, that raises slightly similar questions. I mean, that was a case that you lost. Were you surprised?
Yes, very surprised. I mean, I should explain, I didn't start that case. Other lawyers started that case. There were other barristers, and then they changed course. This was just before lockdown. In fact, the first trial had to be adjourned because we were in the middle of lockdown. And I think I was brought in a couple of months at most beforehand. So he had decided long before that he wanted to take action. And yes, it was against the Sun newspaper as opposed to Amber Heard, but the allegation was still the same. And he decided that was he wanted. I think it was because of, if I remember, the reaction that he was getting, and he wanted to get. He wanted to take some action about it.
I mean, he was getting cancelled, or he was losing roles in films.
Yes. Yeah. And he was adamant that he had, look, I'm not speaking out of turn, this all came up, there was a public trial. They had a toxic relationship. I mean, that's an understatement. But he was adamant that he had never hit her, and quite the contrary. And there was a lot of evidence that came out in court that was to the contrary. So yes, was I surprised? I was. If we'd have had, it's the one case I think I said before that I thought there was a miscarriage of justice. And that's not something I say lightly. And I have been involved in cases, obviously, for 30 years. If we'd have had a jury trying that case, I think unquestionably we would have succeeded.
Because it was reversed about 6 months later in the US.
Exactly.
And I guess it goes to the heart of what we now call the court of public opinion,
yes.
Right? We say that very flippantly, but actually, I wonder if that is impacting your job, our perception, how we see the law, that whoever has the best media strategy, the best PR strategy wins the war, whatever the actual case says.
There's a lot of truth in that. I mean, one aspect of representing high-profile clients is that you have to have one eye very firmly on the court of public opinion, because, as you say, it can be a Pyrrhic victory sometimes.
Do you play to that?
I don't play to it, but I'm very conscious of it, and it does feature very heavily, and clients are very conscious of it. So if you're doing your job, which is representing your clients to the best of your ability, and you're representing their interests, then yes, you have to be aware of it. Courts don't always like there being that public dimension to trials. Judges, and I understand why, judges want to focus on the evidence in front of them.
Aren't we getting to a point where the whole idea of a jury not knowing things or not seeing things outside the courtroom is preposterous? I mean, you look at Trump's trial in Manhattan, and they had to go through the whole sort of system of who likes him, who voted, jury selection, and he just said the whole thing's a witch hunt. Obviously, electorally, I guess it made absolutely no difference, or maybe even helped.
Apparently not.
I mean, are we getting to a point where you can't tell juries what to look at, what to read, what to say, what to think?
I mean, I agree with you. I think it's fascinating. I mean, I watch the American process, and there's part of me that would love to appear in American courts. I mean, there is so much more leeway, and historically, I grew up, so to speak, appearing in front of juries, and I love jury advocacy. But it's very different, and now with high-profile cases, I think it is hugely unrealistic to expect you're going to find jurors who know nothing about the case. Now,
you worked for Trump and Melania once, didn't you? I mean,
I did. I primarily for Melania in the end, because she's the one that brought a claim. The Daily Mail or the Mail Online accused her of having been an escort, and she brought a claim against them, and they backed down. I think we got quite far along the process, but they backed down.
Again, were you dealing personally with her? Were you advising her?
Yes.
Would you work for Trump again?
That's a difficult question. There is a principle of the cab rank rule, which means you're obliged to act for anyone who wants to instruct you. That's obviously, again, nuanced, because there
I
are
mean, if he
reasons
came
why.
to you and he said, I need your help, you're the best in the business at this.
I'd
say
have
yes.
to think very carefully what the case was, but I mean, as I say, there's a cab rank rule. He hasn't, so I don't need to decide.
You told the FT, though, what's the public interest in knowing that role models have feet of clay? Do you really believe that?
I think it's, as I said, I think there's a balance to be had between, what's truly in the public interest and what the public are interested in. And again, it's a sliding scale. It depends what you're saying. It depends whether you are demonstrating that somebody who is well known because they are talented either for acting or because they're very talented at playing football or whatever makes them talented. If what you want to reveal to the world has got nothing to do with that, then no, I don't understand that.
But I think, break it down for the public. They'll be saying, if someone's a wrong 'un, they may have made their money, they may have made their reputation off their fame or their skill or their sporting prowess, whatever. But if somebody's a wrong un, fundamentally...
What's a wrong 'un?
Well, this is what I'm asking.
And that's the point, exactly.
If they beat their wife, if they're, guilty of appalling behaviour behind closed doors, if they're trying to shut down, I don't know, bullying behaviour, is your job to help them shut it down?
I think it's, as I say, it really depends. It's so fact specific. I mean, that's the difference between privacy and other areas of the law. It's very fact specific. If somebody commits a criminal offence, then I agree with you. There's a public interest in knowing about that. If somebody just behaves badly in private life, well, it depends what one means by badly. And the truth is, human beings are human beings and they make mistakes and they do things that are wrong. And yes, I think, if you take one end of the spectrum, if people are going out and saying, right, vote for me because I embody family values or I, have a strong political stance on something, and you find out that they have completely the opposite view in private, I think you're entitled to know that because you're making a choice as to who you vote for. But on the other end of the spectrum, there are people...
Or who you go and see playing a football match, who you go and...
But do you go and see them because you think they're a lovely person and very wholesome? No, you go and see them because they're good at football. You could apply that, I think, across the board. Yeah. If accountancy was a spectator sport, then people would be looking at the private lives of accountants. Do we need to know that?
I guess the question I'm asking more fundamentally is, do you ever think I might be on the wrong side here? Democracy dies in darkness was the sort of masthead of the Washington Post,
yes,
which is now gone.
Now gone, yes.
Do you sometimes think I might be the man advocating the darkness?
I don't, because I have chosen, I think, very carefully, as I say, in line with the cab rank rule, because you always have to be conscious of that. But I will tell someone if I don't think that I'm the best person to do the case, because I don't necessarily, believe in what they're doing. Now, if notwithstanding that, they still want me to act for them, then I have to. But in the real world, no one wants someone who is not advocating their case. But the vast majority of times, my job is to find what is the problem that someone is facing and to find a solution. And the trick is really putting yourself in that person's shoes, understanding what he or she, feels. Why are they, upset about something that's been published or about to be published? Why are they upset about an intrusion into their private life? And then to advise them on the best way to deal with that. And the best way is not always going to court. But the idea that somehow, you are shutting down the press, there are all sorts of safeguards in place, judicial safeguards and so on. And so I'm not, overly concerned that I am somehow, on the wrong side. Mostly because, and maybe I'm fortunate enough, I've found myself representing individuals or even corporations who are standing up against generally much more powerful organisations, whether it's the media, whether it's the press, whether it's any number of organisations. So, I understand that process very well.
Let's end where we started then. You've been a champion of the phone hacked. You've been working on these cases for years. Do you think you've cleaned up the way the press works? Or do you think it has cleaned up? I mean, technology aside.
Yes. Well, technology aside, I think it's a combination of both. I think the litigation has forced newspapers to think twice about how they get information.
Do you think the press is less powerful now in the UK?
I mean, circulations have dropped enormously, so I'm quite surprised sometimes at how influential newspapers are. I mean, in terms of politics, yes, it always surprises me that nowadays, I mean, it's generational, but the younger generation doesn't read newspapers so much, or certainly doesn't read them in a conventional way. So they get their news from all sorts of different areas and all sorts of different mediums. I am surprised at how influential the press still seems to be. And
do you stay in touch with your clients? I mean, is that something, do they become part of the wider Sherborne family? Do you know what Prince Harry's state of mind is now? Do you sort of get a sense whether he's laid demons to rest now?
I don't generally befriend clients because that's not really my role. But do clients contact me? Do I stay in touch with some clients? If there's a reason to, yes, I do. If you do a big case with someone, you obviously learn a lot about, how they think, what makes them tick, and that's very important, as I say, in providing a solution for them. You need to understand what it is that they're concerned about. But that's not my role. Is to sort of provide some sort of greater sort of therapy for clients. My role is to really understand them and achieve what they want to achieve, and that sometimes overlaps with having to understand what why they've got to where they are and meeting them where they're at. But as I say, that's very much the profession is to put their case in the strongest possible way.
And do you think Harry got that? Did he talk to you about that?
I think Harry achieved what he wanted to achieve as far as the process could take him. What happens next, as I say, is really for the authorities to decide, and that's what he wants. That's what he's asked for, and we'll have to see what the response to that is.
He wants there to be a full inquiry or police
Yes,
inquiry?
I think he wants a proper investigation by the police, and then they can decide whether there are charges to be brought, and he wants an inquiry. But, we focus very much on Prince Harry. And obviously there's a lot of focus on my representation of Prince Harry. He's one of a lot of clients I've represented over the years. And that's obviously part of what he has done. He's got a powerful voice. But he is one of a large number of victims who want to see something more. And what he has done is he's used his profile to try and achieve that for everyone.
David Sherborne, thank you. Thanks very much.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.